and then we'll get going. All right, so today is, plug my headphones in. Today is October 26th, and this is our Greek studies meeting. You can see very lightly attended, only 13 or 12 students here. So in 20 years from now, when you hear people complaining about how no one no one is studying the Bible and everything is terrible, remember that we have opportunities to study, and very few families take advantage of them. This is a live class where we're learning how to read and translate the Greek language, the biblical Greek language. It's available to any students who want to attend. There's not even any cost to attend these meetings. And we get 12 kids in the world show up for it. So the resources are available. We have to make good use of them. Today, what I promised last week I said, today we can work if you want to. We can work on reading a little bit. All right, we can read a little bit. If you'd like to practice reading the Greek, we've worked on pronunciation a bit. You've got videos that explain the Greek alphabet, the names of the letters, the sounds of the letters. In our past live meetings, we've looked at the accent marks and the breathing marks. We've talked about how they're supposed to be read and things like that. So if any of you would like to try to read today, we can spend a little bit of time doing that. If you're in a noisy environment or you don't have headphones on, so all of the background noise will get into your microphone, I'd rather that you not try to read. And the reason why I say that is because kids are often eager to get on the microphone and chat and talk, but it puts a lot of pressure on your parents if you're in the middle of the house and your poor mom is trying to take care of other kids and she's got you flipping the microphone on in the middle of the room. You know, we don't want to do that. So if you're in a noisy environment, you've just got to respect not only your family members who don't want to be on the microphone necessarily, but also other students who really don't want to hear all the background noise of your house. Okay, so only if you're in a quiet place should you volunteer to read. All right. You know, if you're a girl who's got an annoying brother that's going to make noise in the background, probably don't want to do it. Okay. All right. I wasn't thinking of anyone in particular, but you know who you are. Okay, so we can do some Greek reading today, and if if we don't have a lot of volunteers for reading, that'll take up a lot of time, we can just work on translating lesson 2. Okay, we can just move on to lesson 2 and translate. One parent wrote to me yesterday and said, my child is not necessarily moving ahead at the same pace that this class is going to move ahead. So what should he do, right? Should he just kind of hang back and stay on his personal lessons, or should he participate in the class? And what I want all of you to know is that you're all welcome to attend the class. I'm always going to explain the Greek, so you can always learn things. And just by being here, you'll be able to pick up a lot. So even if you're not on the lesson we're working on, or if you're just getting started, it's okay, because if you come to the lesson and just pay attention, you'll learn some helpful things, and it may even help you when you go back to your lesson. Even if it's a previous lesson, it's still okay. So you're always welcome to come to these classes, okay? So having said all that, what I've got on the screen here, and I'm going to share it now. So let me get out of my own picture. I'm going to share my screen. You should see the Greek text. James, give me a quick wave if you can see the text okay on your screen. Can you see? Okay, good. Now, if you're, Lara, you said you were in a car. So if you're like on a phone or a tablet or something like that, I'm not sure if it's going to be large enough for you to see and read. But it's usually when I do things, I intend for students to be working at a desk on a laptop or something like that. So it should be big enough to read for you guys on the screen. And if it's not, then just don't volunteer to read. Okay, but what we can do here is I'll ask if anybody wants to volunteer. Don't bother saying yes just yet, but I'll ask if anyone would like to volunteer and read, practice reading a little bit. You know, there's nothing to be afraid of. If you mess up, we'll make fun of you for a few minutes, but then we'll We'll get back to work. So don't be afraid. No, we'll be positive. We'll just try to focus on, pointing out mistakes you make, not to pick on you, but to help you learn what to focus on. But if you can't volunteer, if you don't want to turn a microphone on or you don't feel comfortable, then just practice reading it on your own to yourself, and then listen when someone else reads it. Listen to how they read it. See if you can find any mistakes that they make, or just learn from their good example if they get it all right. So you can make good use of this meeting, even if you don't volunteer to read. Okay. All right. So having said all that, if anybody would like to volunteer, if anyone would like to give it a try, Henry says he'll give it a try. Now, Henry's in England, so we're going to get sort of a British version of Greek language, right, Henry? So we've got to, we're going to have different dialects. I've heard some teachers in Southern American states teach Greek and Latin classes with a Southern accent, and it sounds terrible. So I think, usually the British accent is pretty welcome by American people. But Southern American accent, and when I say Southern, I don't mean South America like the country, the continent of South America. I mean like Georgia, North Carolina, Alabama. When those folks get into classical studies, it gets very interesting because you hear some very interesting pronunciations of words. Okay. So I don't know that we have to be careful about any Southern drawl getting in here, but a British accent I think will be okay. So Henry, you want to give it a try? Let me help you unmute yourself because I've got you all on permanent mute. All right, Henry, if you want to give it a try, I'll highlight a phrase and just read what I highlight, okay? I'm not going to have you read everything.
Again.
There you go. Go ahead. Nice and slow. Just take your time and try to read everything perfectly, okay?
Ageneto, anthropos, ares, dalmenos, para, theou, ornama, auto, Ioannes.
Okay, very good. Now in the chat, did anybody notice any mistakes? Any point you'd like to point out where there was a mistake, and by mistake, I just mean an imperfection, okay? Not something terrible. There were a couple mistakes. I'll point out a couple mistakes. One, he read a letter incorrectly, and one, yeah, that's right, James. So there was one P. Henry, are you still open, Mike? I think you are. Try reading that word again.
Apistalmenos.
That's better. Okay. So the first time you read that, you said alestal. Okay. So just be careful there. So apesta, and then he said apestalmenos. What's wrong with that? Apestalmenos. What's wrong with that reading? Who can identify a problem with that? Apestalmenos. Apestalmenos. What's wrong there? Nobody notices? Yeah, very good, James. Okay. Wrong accent. Okay. Apestalmenos places the acute accent over that alpha right there. Apestalmenos. Whereas the accent is actually on that next epsilon. So it's apestalmenos. Apestalmenos. You hear that, Henry?
Yeah.
So try that again.
Apestalmenos.
Very good. Okay. Other than that, I think most of it was good. Just watch this circumflex accent right there. Try to get that up and down emphasis, right? Theou, theou. Got that? So try it again, verse 6. Nice and slow. Try to get it perfect this time.
Ageneto, anthropos, apestalmenos, para, theou, onoma, autou, Ioannes.
Okay, that was just about perfect. Very good. All right. Thank you very much. So that was good. Okay. So now that the brave soul went first, and all you other cowering followers got to wait and let him take all the bullets. Who would like to try second? Technically, you can't. Yeah, I understand. That's okay. All right, James. We'll try the same verse, okay? So you should be able to unmute yourself. There you go. Same verse, 6.
Geneto anthros apestamenos para Theou auto anes.
All right, let's try something because you're breaking up a little bit. So let's try something. Turn your camera off. All right, try reading now because we don't need to see your face. Not like we need to stare at your ears while you read for us. So we've got the reading there. If you turn your camera off, it might make your connection a little better for reading. So try reading that again, okay?
Egeneto anthropos apestamenos para Theou onoma auto Ioannes.
Perfect. Thank you. Good. All right. And that was perfect. So I don't have any corrections to make there. But you don't get a prize because you went second. All right. So you get the benefit of not making any mistakes, but the disadvantage of not getting any reward. All right. Anybody else want to try verse 6? Anyone else want to try to read verse 6? And you see what we did there, James. If you just turn your camera off, sometimes that frees up your bandwidth to get a clear connection. Anyone else want to try? Giovanni's got a cough drop in his mouth. So you're excused, Giovanni. All right. Seeing no more volunteers there for verse 6, how about verse 7? This gets even more difficult. Anybody want to try verse 7? All right, James. So turn your camera off again, and we'll try with no camera. Nice and slow, okay? Because we want to try to get it perfect. So take your time, think about each word, look at the symbols, look at the letters, and do your best to get it perfect, okay? You should be able to go.
Houtos eothen eis marturian hina marturese peri tu photos hina pantes pisteusosin diautu.
And that was perfect. Excellent. All right, good. So that was perfect. That was perfect. And that was a very difficult verse to read. You got a lot of wacky stuff there. You've got this houtos, right? That's difficult to read right there. Houtos. Another difficult thing in there, this word pisteusosin is difficult to read. And then you also got that abbreviation correct and read that correctly. Plus you got all the accents right. So that was perfect. Very good. All right. So that was perfect. Anybody else want to try verse 7? That's a challenging verse to read. Anybody else want to try that? Henry's going to go for a try. So Henry, just take your time, okay? Let me unmute you here. Go ahead, verse 7.
Houtos, Elthane, Eis, Martorian, Hina, Martorisa, Peri, to Photos, Ina, Pantes, Pistes, Ocene, Dia, Autu.
Okay, good. Any criticism for Henry? And the criticism's not nasty. Don't be a bunch of wimps. We're trying to help each other, right? Sometimes you have faults that you personally don't recognize that other people can be sensitive to. Wasn't perfect. Anybody have any criticism to offer? Anything to work on? One thing you've got to work on, Henry, is recognizing the accents and make sure you get the accents in the right place. Okay. I know British speakers like to think they can just accent any syllable they want because they think all languages are theirs and they just read words however they please. But you got to pay attention to the accent marks. Okay. Pay attention to accent marks and just be careful with that. Other than that, I don't think other than accent marks there was anything wrong. So why don't you try reading that one more time, Henry, and just give extra attention to the accent marks, okay?
Hutos,
Mm-hmm.
Elfen,
Mm-hmm.
Aes. Martorian,
That's that right there. You see right there what you did? You said Marturian. Marturian. How should that be read? Look at the accent.
Martorian,
Very good. Okay. So and now listen, why would I pick on these little silly accent marks? The reason why, and we saw this in the last lesson, there are places where the slightest difference in pronunciation can actually distinguish a word or a form of a word. Okay, so it does at times get more important than just this. Also, if we eventually get into poetry, you've got to be able to read the language perfectly to hear the rhythm and sound of the poetry. So we want to practice it while we're getting started. I'm not just picking on you. We're just going to use this as the opportunity to work on that. So Marturian, that was right. I'm sorry, not Marturian, not Marturian, Marturian. All right, Marturian. All right, pick up from here and keep going and pay attention to the accents. All right.
Ina, Martoricia,
Marturese.
Martorese,
Mm-hmm.
Peri, Tu,
Mm-hmm.
Photos,
Good.
Ina,
Good.
Pantes,
Mm-hmm.
Pisteus, Sosin, Dia Autu.
Okay, so right there in that word pisteusosin, notice that epsilon and upsilon, they make a diphthong, so they're read as one sound. Okay, so it's just pisteusosin. And then here we don't read that alpha was dropped, so it's just diautu, diautu. Okay, got that? So very
Yep.
good. A couple points of correction, but other than that, everything sounded good. So very good. Thank you. All right. Anybody else? Any other brave souls want to try to read the Greek? Like I said, we'll only make fun of you for a few minutes and then we'll stop and try to be positive. So don't worry, don't be afraid. If nobody wants to read, we'll try verse 8 with the same two readers taking all the bullets here. We see what kind of soldiers you guys would be. You'd send James and Henry out into battle and stay behind the rocks. And after the enemies exhausted all their ammo, then you guys would run out. Okay. I'm just teasing. It's okay. All right. So verse 8, we'll go on to verse 8. We'll just let Henry and James be the martyrs here for the group. Okay. Henry or James, want to try verse 8 here? All right, Henry's just going to get back into it. Again, Henry, your weakness has been accents, so just try to give special attention to the accents, okay?
Ook, Ein, Achaionos,
Mm-hmm.
To, Phos, Al, Ina, Martoresa,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Peri, Tu, Photos.
Okay, good. That was the best reading so far. Good. That was your best attempt so far. So that's good. The only thing I would say there is with these etas, like in marturese, I can't see my cursor. One second. Make sure with that eta, you get that sound a. Okay. Just that clean a sound. And the iota subscript written under that eta, just ignore it. All right. Just ignore that iota under there. Everything else was pretty good. The other thing I would say for all of you is make sure when you see words like this that you pay attention to those breathing signs and get the breathing right. Okay. If the breathing sign is shaped like a C, it's a rough breathing. If it's like a backward C, it's no breathing. All right. So that's good. Turn Henry off. James, I'm betting that you're wanting to give it a try now. I'll unmute you, but if you're choppy, I'll tell you if you're choppy and turn your camera off. Verse 8. Let me highlight it for you here. Verse 8. There you go.
Uk again tos alhina martese peritu photos.
Stop and turn your camera off, okay? Because you're just a little bit, you sound like a robot. Try now. Verse 8. Start at the top.
Uk ein ekeinos
Mhm.
tophos alhina marturese peritu photos.
All right. That's pretty good, James. So you've got this figured out here. You've got the reading of the language figured out. Yeah, when you get choppy, it sounds like a robot's reading. So but again, you guys see what we did there. If there's interruption, just turn off some of the parts of the Zoom meeting and free up your bandwidth. You can just turn your video off, turn your camera off. Okay, it's no big deal. So that's very good. That James, you've got this really down to an art here. So that's great. Okay. And for the rest of you, hopefully you're paying attention because you've got two good readers here showing you how to do it. And it's helpful. It's actually helpful to see some mistakes because the mistakes are usually common, right? Those are the same kind of mistakes anyone is going to make. You see, it's accent marks, breathing marks. Very rarely is it a wrong letter. That's rare. That's more of a careless mistake. But it's usually the breathing marks and accents, and you just need to think about the word before you read it. Just look at it, think about how it should sound, and then say it. Don't try to read one syllable at a time because you won't get the accents right. So look at each word, think of its sound, and then say it. Okay. All right. So Giovanni is volunteering here to do verse 9. Now that's pretty brave, Giovanni, because this is another tough one. So let's get you opened up here, Giovanni, and we'll see how your connection is first and make sure you sound okay. So you can go ahead and start verse 9, and if you sound funky, then I'll just tell you to stop, okay? Should be able to unmute your microphone. You need to unmute yourself first. Yeah, we'll wait. We've got 31 minutes left. Or how about you take your time on your microphone, get that figured out, and we'll come back to you later, okay? Let's do that. That's a better use of our time here. Giovanni, there you go, Giovanni, you're on.
En to fos to alephinon ho fortise panta anfronopon
Mhm.
erkomenon eiston kosmon.
Very good. That was almost perfect. Giovanni, how old are you?
9.
9 years
10.
old. 10 years old. Okay, so Giovanni, Giovanni is very good for a 10-year-old, right? So thank you. The only thing that I heard in there that was wrong, Giovanni, the only thing I heard that was wrong was this word right here, because you didn't get the accent right. So why don't you try that? Look at that word for a second. Think about how it should be read and read it with the right accent.
Alethinon.
Very good. Perfect. Okay. So that's perfect. And let's try reading the whole thing again. Okay. Want to try reading it again? Let's get everything perfect here. Oh, you're muted again. Hold on. There you go.
In to fos to alesino non
Try that one more time. That's the
ho
word. That's the word you struggled with. Try that one more time.
alesinon
Good.
ho fortize panta anthropon
Good. Okay. Anthropon. Anthropon.
erko menon
Mm-hmm.
eis ton kosmon.
Very good. Very good. That was much better. Okay. So again, your only trouble there, the only mistake you made was just an accent mark, which is very good. You got all the letters right. Breathing marks were all right. And there was just one word where there was an acute accent on the last syllable, which is not normal. So it sounds a little funny. But that was the only mistake. Okay, very good, Giovanni. All right, so verse 9, anyone else want to give verse 9 a try? Henry, let me find you on here. We'll let you go at it again. And all of the rest of you, remember, you don't have to just sit there and stare at the screen. Try reading it yourself. Try reading it yourself as we go along. See if there's a point where you and the reader differ, and then see if if the reader is right or you're right. And then you can correct yourself even if you're not able to read on the camera here. All right, so it's no big deal. So Henry, you want to give a try for verse 9 here? Go ahead. You should be open.
Ein, to phos, to alethinon, or ho fortize panta anthropon, kominon eis ton kosmon.
Very good. One note that preposition ace right there. Notice that the epsilon and iota are a diphthong, so it's just one syllable. It's just ace. Okay. Other than that, I think that was pretty good. The other thing to watch out for, and I think this is because of having a British background, you have a habit of reading the alpha with that sound rather than ah. Okay. So just try to remember that everywhere you see a vowel, its sound is going to be the same. And the alpha is always pronounced that open classical sound. All right. Everything else sounded good. So thank you for that. All right. James, you want to give verse 9 a try? I'll give you open mic there. So good. Verse 9, let me highlight it for you. Verse 9. Nice and slow.
Ein to phos to alethinon ho photize panta anthropon erchomenon eis ton kosmon.
Very good. Perfect. All right. And notice that ton right there. Ton, you see it's got that grave accent. You just lower your voice a little. Okay. Just lower your voice a little. So that was good. Very good. Let's turn that off. Okay. So we're down to verse 9. Any other volunteers? I know some of you can't do it. If you want to, just let me know. Okay. If you want to try, just let me know. Like I said, the jokes will be brief, and then we'll help you out. Okay. We'll only laugh at you for a little while if you make a mistake. Verse 10. Verse 10 looks pretty easy. Anyone want to give verse 10 a try here? Henry, go for verse 10. Looks pretty easy. Go ahead, Henry. You're on.
En to cosmo ein kai ho cosmos diautu agenito, kai ho cosmos auton
Mhm.
uk egno.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay, that was perfect. Very good. All the accents were right. The letters were all right. Vowels were right. Perfect. There, sorry. Sorry about that. Giovanni asked about the words cosmos, cosmon, and cosmo. And I was just saying that in English, they transliterate as COSMO. And we have words like cosmology. I typed them in the chat if you look. Cosmology, cosmonaut. Who knows what either of those words mean? What is cosmology? What is cosmology? Anybody know what cosmology means? You should know what the ology part means. Anybody know what cosmology? Yeah, James, that's right. The study of the universe, study of the heavens. The cosmos refers to like everything that exists, the cosmos, the whole universe. Okay, so cosmology is the study of the universe. How about cosmonaut? What is a cosmonaut? Cosmonaut. Anybody know what that means? Or guess what that means? Cosmonaut. You guys aren't very brave. Universe astronaut. That's good. That's right, Giovanni. The word nauta or naute means a sailor, right? It's a traveler or a sailor, like nautical. If you think about nautical means relating to the sea, a sailor. A sailor's mile would be a nautical mile. That naut means a traveler or a sailor. So astronaut means one who travels to the stars or through the stars, and cosmonaut means one who travels or sails through the universe. Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, an astronaut doesn't actually go beyond our solar system, right? But it's sort of a glorified name for a person who travels outside of our atmosphere. Okay, so we have astronaut, cosmonaut, same thing, just different words. So cosmos just means the world or the universe. And you see there in verse 10, you see what, three different forms or two different forms of that word? We see a couple of them. We see cosmon there in verse 9. We see cosmo with that Yoda subscript in verse 10. And then we see cosmos. So a bunch of different forms. All right. But same noun. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Now, if you study Latin reading and you just think about the verse, right? If you think about the verse in Latin, you can think about the equivalent, right? What word in Latin is equivalent to that Greek word? So verse 10, we have ento cosmo, and in Latin we have in mundo erat, right? In mundo erat, if you know the Latin. In mundo erat. Who can tell me the Latin for the next phrase? In mundo erat. Who knows the next phrase in Latin? I know that's challenging, but some of you might know it. If you do your translation exercises as you're told, you'll know it. If you just shortcut them and submit, you just do it once. In mundo erat, yeah, apud. But that's not what we're on here. In mundo erat, and then we have kai ho cosmos diautu egeneto. Okay. So I mean, you can translate the Greek. Don't take a wild guess. What does kai mean? What does kai mean? And so what's the Latin equivalent? Et. Very good. All right. So et, and then we have ho cosmos. What's that going to be in Latin? Et mundus right? And there's no erat there. We're on this part here. Kai ho cosmos. So we have et mundus, and then we have diautu. What about diautu? Think Latin. Per eum. Per eum. I'm not sure if it's eum. Et mundus per ipsum. Very good. And then we have egeneto. Et mundus per ipsum. What comes next? Factus est. Very good. That's right. Okay. So you can use your Latin to think about the meaning of these words. Okay. So cosmos is equivalent to mundus. Very good. Now you also see the benefit of studying multiple languages, right? Both Latin and Greek. Now here's a challenging question for you that I talked about in Latin reading class. Why does the Latin and Greek line up so perfectly when we translate them? Why do they line up so perfectly? Can anyone explain that for me? Why do they line up so perfectly? That's a challenging question. I don't expect many of you to know it, but I did talk about it in our Latin reading class. James has it right. Yeah, because Saint Jerome translated the Greek into Latin, and because Saint Jerome knew that the Bible was inspired by God, he believed that even the order of the words was inspired. And so when he translated the Greek into Latin, he kept the word order almost exactly as it is in the Greek. So very good. Okay, so that's why, because Saint Jerome translated the Greek word for word into Latin, and so the words line up almost perfectly. Now, today, in modern translation, modern scholarship, we wouldn't consider that to be a good translation because we're arrogant. We think we do everything better. We would try to translate the ideas, but what's the problem with translating the ideas? What's the problem with trying to make an easy to read translation? What's the problem with that? What's the problem with trying to translate the ideas rather than the words? No, let's think beyond that. Not that they're the same order. What's the problem with trying to translate the ideas rather than just the words? What's the problem? It's harder. Come on. It's harder. I say, what's the problem? You say it's harder, obviously, right? What's harder about it? Why is it harder to translate ideas than the word for word? Well, that's right, Henry. That's right, James. Yeah, now you're getting to it. Okay. You're moving away from the actual text, which we shouldn't really want to do, right? We don't want to move away from the text. If the world was perfect, we would all study the original languages directly. There would be no Bible translations if the world was perfect, right? But when we do need a translation, we don't want some guy just because he got a degree in, Greek or English studies or whatever. We don't want him telling us what the Bible actually means. That's something different. So it requires interpretation. And who has authority to interpret the actual ideas of the scriptures? Do scholars have that authority? If I go get a PhD in Greek, do I then have the authority to tell everybody what the New Testament means? Mm-mm. Who has that authority? Well, yeah, only God can. That's true. That's true. Only God knows exactly what the intention was. But fortunately, God is generous to us and he doesn't just, shut us out. He reveals it. How does he reveal it? We have the church, the bishops, the pope, the church. How do we actually find the right interpretation of scripture when we have languages being translated? What do we mean by, I'm a Catholic, I'm a member of the church. Does that mean that I have the ability to interpret scripture? I'm a part of the church, right? James says magisterium. James, what is the magisterium? Who knows what the magisterium actually is? What is the magisterium? We often hear that word thrown around, but what does that actually mean? Magisterium. Is that somebody who lives in Rome, down in the Vatican Museum? He's called the magisterium, the official guy that tells us what the Bible means. No, it's James has it. It's the bishops together with the Pope, right? So the magisterium of the church is the living authority of the Catholic Church. It's not just the Pope, but it does not exist apart from the Pope. It's not just a bishop. Just because a bishop says something doesn't mean that that's true. That's not how authority works. It's the bishops in union with the Pope. So there has to be that unity of Pope and bishops. When they teach something authoritatively, that's the official interpretation. Okay. So just because you have Bishop so-and-so says something, that's only authoritative if it's said in union with the Pope and other bishops. Okay. So when someone comes up with a wacky idea and they find some individual isolated bishop to say it for them, that doesn't prove that their idea is Catholic. It's that idea of unity. The Pope and bishops together form the living magisterium. Okay. So that's where we would go. That's why translating the ideas is really not the business of any individual person or scholar, unless, of course, the church asked someone to do that. Like Saint Jerome was actually asked to translate by one of the popes. Anybody know the pope who asked Saint Jerome to translate the Bible? Sorry, I'm grilling you on all of these religious questions here, church history questions, catechism questions, but they're all relevant here. Anybody know what pope it was without Googling, you bunch of modern little cheaters? Without Googling? No Google, no Chat GPT. Saint Gregory? No, it was Damasus or Damasus. Yeah, that's right. Starts with a D. Okay. Anyway, that's just trivia. I don't mean to trouble you with that. But Saint Jerome was asked to translate, and think about it, even though he was given the authority by the Pope to do the translating work, even though he was trusted to do it, he still chose not to do it. He still chose not to try to interpret it as he translated, but kept it simple. Okay, that's the mark of a saint and wise man. So good. Now, Henry up above said the church fathers. The church fathers have the authority of interpretation. That's like true and false at the same time. Does anybody know how the church fathers are used to establish interpretation of the scriptures? Anybody know how? The church fathers are like the early leaders of the church, like St. Augustine, St. Jerome, St. Gregory, St. John Chrysostom. Yeah, that's right, Henry. They all have to agree. Okay, so in church history, when there are different interpretations of the Bible, and you can read the writings and the homilies of the church fathers, you can read them. Not often, but sometimes you'll find disagreement. You'll see St. Jerome thinks this and St. Augustine thinks something else, and they write letters back to each other, back and forth. And they're kind of nasty to each other and arguing with each other because people weren't so wimpy back then. They weren't afraid to disagree. So you can read letters of St. Augustine and St. Jerome writing letters back and forth, arguing with each other, disagreeing. When there's a disagreement, we have a controversial issue, right? And so the church fathers really don't help us when there's a controversial issue. Usually that gets settled by something like a council where all the bishops and the Pope get together and hash out the details. But when we have an issue where all of the fathers are found to be in agreement, usually that's a sign that it's the truth. Okay, so it can be argued on the authority of the church fathers if they all agree, but they don't always agree. And they often disagree on very important things. Like, for example, St. Jerome and St. Augustine disagreed on which books are truly the books of sacred scripture. They disagreed on the canon of scripture. St. Jerome taught more like the Protestant idea that only 66 books should be considered canonical, and St. Augustine said no, the others should be included as well. And that wasn't settled until later in church history, officially, right? Officially. Okay, so church fathers are important, but they don't necessarily establish any truth. So in your future writing and arguing, if you say that I believe in this or that, and here's a quote from a church father that supports what I said, does that prove that you're right? That you can find a quote from a church father? Does that prove that you're right? No. Okay, no, it doesn't prove your point. How about if I find a quote from a saint, right? I say Saint John Bosco said this. Does that prove that I'm right? Nope. So isolated quotes from church fathers or saints, even if they're famous saints, don't prove that what we say is true. How about if I quote the catechism? If I quote the catechism of the Catholic Church, does that prove that I'm right? Pretty much, yeah. Unless I like spin it and twist it to mean something it can't possibly mean. So I might have to prove that my reading of the catechism is what the catechism intends. But when you get into your writing and arguing, you've got to make sure you understand how to actually prove Catholic teaching, because much of what people commonly do doesn't even make any sense. Quoting a pope, how about that? How about if you quote a pope, does that prove that what you're saying is right? That's very controversial, okay? That's very controversial. So a pope, right? It's interesting because the magisterium is the pope and the bishops together, but the pope ultimately has the supreme authority. So it's hard to ever argue that the pope would be wrong. Now, some people will say, well, the pope can just share his personal opinion, and well, it still doesn't mean he's wrong just because it's his opinion. And if you study the Baltimore Catechism in Baltimore Catechism 2 in our course, you'll know that it says that you should really never assume that the Pope is wrong about anything. It's not like he's just going to stumble and say some nonsense like the sky is red or something like that. All right, so that's enough theology. Somebody asked the question before about the languages. I think it was Victor. Yeah. Why did St. John write letters in Greek and not the language of the Jewish people? That's a very good question. Why did St. John, who was a Jew, why did St. John write in Greek? Anybody know why? Any chronology students know why the apostles wrote in Greek and not Hebrew? He was writing to Gentiles. That's a good guess. He was writing to Gentiles. Gentiles are non-Jews, in case you don't know what that means. He was writing to Gentiles. That's a good guess. Now, let me ask you this. This is going to make it even more confusing. Who was the government in control of Israel when St. John was alive? Who was in control? Bryce has it right. Rome. So that makes it even more. Yes, thank you, Janet. That makes it even more confusing. So think about this mess we have in the first century. You've got Jewish men living under Roman control, writing in Greek. What in the world is going on there? Why in the world would Jewish men living in the Roman Empire be writing in Greek? Who's got an idea as to why? All I know is that John was imprisoned. Yeah, he was imprisoned in an island. Yep, that doesn't answer it. Greek was the normal language. Yeah, how in the world would Greek be the normal language? So you've got to know chronology. If you knew your chronology, this would be an easy question. Yeah, Alexander the Great, that's right. So tell me, what about Alexander the Great? When did he live? Who knows when Alexander the Great lived? Let's do a little chronology study here. When did Alexander the Great live? He died in 323. Very good. So let's just hold on a second there. He died in 323. That's 320 years before Christ. So that's almost 400 years before John wrote, or actually more than 400 years. So Alexander the Great conquered the whole world in the 300s, right? Conquered the Middle East, conquered all the way out to Asia and India, all down into Egypt. Alexander the Great conquered everything. He brought Greek culture with him everywhere. Alexander the Great died. What happened to the world after Alexander the Great died? What happened? What happened when Alexander the Great died? Oh man, we've got to study chronology. We've got to read the books of Maccabees in the Bible. His lands were divided. That's right. They were divided by 4 of his successors, 4 of his followers. That's right, Giovanni. Very good. When Alexander the Great died, who did he leave? Who did he leave his kingdom to? Does anybody know that? Again, this is all from chronology. So if you haven't studied chronology that far, you won't know. Who was Alexander's heir? When Alexander was dying, I'll type this, and was asked who should inherit his kingdom, his answer was the strongest, right? That's what he said. He said the strongest. Whoever is the strongest, he will be my heir. Okay? So the kingdom was divided among 4 of his generals that worked under him, and then they started fighting over who would control it. We read about this in the books of the Maccabees in the Bible. Yep, we got to get into chronology too, but it's also in the Bible. It's in the books of the Maccabees. So you had the successors of Alexander with their Greek culture that took over these cities, took over these places, brought Greek studies, brought Greek language with them. It filled the whole world. And that Greek language was still in place when the Romans eventually conquered the followers of Alexander. So the Romans eventually conquered them. Again, you can read about this in the books of the Maccabees in the Bible. It actually talks about this history. And so Latin came later, really never came to the Eastern countries. After the Romans conquered the Greeks, Giovanni said the Hellenistic world above. That word Hellenistic just means Greek or Greek-ish, the Greek-ish world. So that's the answer to that question, Victor. You see, it's a pretty complicated answer, right? So why did St. John write in Greek? Well, even though John was a Jew living in the Roman Empire, he wrote Greek because the world was filled with Greek culture after Alexander the Great conquered the world. So the common language of the people, the common language in those Eastern countries was Greek because of Alexander. So they wrote in Greek. And that's why biblical Greek is called Koine Greek. The word Koine just means common Greek. Okay? So that's a long, complicated answer to that question. Does the word Hellenistic come from Helen? That's a good question. I know it's got, I can't answer that off the top of my head, but the Greeks called themselves Hellenes. They called themselves Hellene, and Greece was by the Greeks. There was no, they didn't call it Greece. They called it Hellas. Hellas was the land of Greece, which we call Greece. It was Hellas. Okay. So Hellenistic means Greekish. Okay, just from the name that they used for their own country, Hellas. They didn't call themselves Greek. That was I think it was Egyptians or the Romans who actually called them Greeks. Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty good with this history, but I'm not an encyclopedia. So that's good. Any other questions? Any other questions? So we did pretty well. We got some practice reading. You guys did very well with reading, those of you who could read. In the future, just so you all know, in the future, think about reading. And if you'd like to read, try to get yourself into a place that's quiet, okay? Try to get yourself into a quiet place. Ask your parents' permission so you don't just throw the microphone on and catch mom, yelling at one of your brothers or something like that. So make sure you've got a quiet place. Greasy. That's interesting. You're saying Hellenistic might mean greasy. That'd be kind of, maybe somebody referred to it like that in sarcasm. But anyway, get yourself in a quiet place. Sometimes just having a headset, you can get a headset. You can ask for a headset for Christmas. You can get one for like $30. Okay. No, Henry, you didn't miss anything but me babbling for the last 5 minutes. You can get a headset. They cost like $30. And the benefit of the headset, there are different kinds of microphones, and the headset microphone sort of blocks out other noise and just picks up the voice of the person wearing the headset. So sometimes that's all you need. Even if it is a little bit noisy, you can use a headset. Okay. So that's all. So if you want to read in the future, just try to get yourself set up in a way where you can read. But that's all for today. I hope that was helpful. Keep practicing on your own. Remember, there are videos that explain all of the sounds and how to read everything. But keep practicing. And in the future, when you feel comfortable, feel free to volunteer. If you have any questions, I'll hang around now for a little while with any questions you guys have. But that's all for content today. So I'm going to turn the recording off, and you're free to go if you're finished with me, and we'll pick up next week. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording here.